Hey guys. If there's anything that irritates me, it's being introduced to a story that takes place in a strange, fantastical world, but then it doesn't take advantage of that strange, fantastical world in any way whatsoever. As such, let's talk about Legenderry, a steampunk adventure. The cover depicts a handful of characters all done up in steampunk garb, and their accessories suggest that they'll be doing things specific to their steampunk world. We've got these two guys actually wearing their goggles instead of just wearing them over their top hats. One of them looks like they're holding some kind of a soldering gun, and I can only imagine what this girl's umbrella does. Does it turn into a sword? A Gatling gun? A flamethrower? The possibilities are endless! And they all appear to be sitting on top of h.g.welles' time machine that looks like it was designed by h.r.geiger. Yeah, watch. They're going to travel into the future where they discover that the only steampunk adventure left to be had is by wandering through the halls of Comic-Con. Our story opens in The Big City. No, seriously, that's what it's called. Where we learn about this world through a radio broadcast? Yeah, that certainly says steampunk, doesn't it? Okay, fine, you can say that it's steam power that's running the electrical turbines in this world, but wireless radio broadcasts and electricity aren't the first things that come to mind when I think about steampunk. Through the miracle of wireless, we're beaming nightly news and views to everyone in the big city and all of our ships, in the air or at sea. Yeah, that's great and all, but I'm just wondering why the hell this little boy is walking the streets at this time of night with a woman who looks like this. Is this just how mothers dress in this world, or is this a lady of the evening who isn't very picky? We then go inside a nightclub called Club Scarlet, where the radio announcer narrator talks about who's in attendance. Because our sailors and airmen overseas still need their fix of TMZ, don't they? The Main Street Madman himself, Madagascar Brown, is entertaining the room of luminaries tonight, along with his band of renowns. And who do my spies tell me is there tonight? Let's see. Why look, it's Orlando Engstrom, who only an hour ago starred in his 300th dazzling performance of our sacred honor on the Paramount stage. But hold on, that isn't Mrs. Engstrom on his arm tonight. Oh no, it's the new discovery, sultry, stormy Lydia Valkaran, headlining at the Stardust. Has the notorious Rank Engstrom traded in his celebrated copper heiress for a siren songbird? Is divorce number 5 in the offing? Keep your wireless on, my lovelies, for the latest word on a sizzling scandal in the making. Now, whom else can we cast our all-seeing eye upon? How about beloved comedian Jimmy Dusk? I dearly hope that's his daughter he's out with, otherwise, shame, Jimmy, for shame! And here's a rare sight. None other than the lovely and mysterious Madame Pendragon herself, the seldom glimpsed owner of Club Scarlet. And who among a room of immortals is important enough for her to actually deign to sit with? Who else but the richest man in town, newspaper publishing mogul Britt Reed? I wonder what whisperings of global import they could be discussing so intently. There's a reason I just read that entire exchange right there. As bored as all of you probably are right now, God knows I was after reading that, I have just one question. Who is tuning into this guy? Oh, and all of that I just read to you? Completely useless to the plot. Speaking of useless, what's going on with these instruments? Why does this bass have a couple of chimneys on it? Why are the drums rigged with pipes and meters? What purpose do they serve? Yes, it's that kind of steampunk. None of the steampunk aesthetic actually plays into the story in any way whatsoever. They just took ordinary, everyday objects and glued some gears on them. And for those of you who don't recognize this newspaper mogul, Britt Reed is the alter ego of the Green Hornet. Looking back at the cover, yeah, I can totally see these two as being Green Hornet and Kato, but in this kind of costume, they just might be easily mistaken for anybody, especially since Kato's a woman these days. Wouldn't mentioning their presence on the cover help boost sales by drawing in the Green Hornet fans? And this Madame Pendragon? That's Vampirella, who, as far as I can tell, was never named Madame Pendragon. Just what was the point of naming her that? Anyway, they go on for 2 pages straight talking about how to mix a proper martini. How engaging. But Pendragon cuts the conversation short when an injured woman bursts into the club. And then she's followed by the Red Eyes from Mystery Men. I need to let off a little steam, punk. Actually, now that I look at them, I can't decide if they look more like the Red Eyes or like Bane getting his S&M freak on.
Oh yes, you like that. You're a naughty Batman, aren't you?
They demand to have the woman handed over to them, and the dining staff all whip out some rather futuristic-looking guns, but Pendragon materializes with the woman in her arms right in front of them, blocking their line of fire. Does she have teleporting abilities, or did the artist just goof up here? You gentlemen need to know 2 things. Wait, make that 3 things. The first is... No, never mind, it's unimportant. Then why did you bring it up? Apparently the second important thing is how this guy is using the word certain incorrectly. So important that he knows that. And the third thing is that no one causes trouble in Pendragon's club. She violently throws the unconscious woman at Britt, no doubt causing even more injury than she has already, and she leaps at the attackers. And she has to be naked to do this for some reason. You may also notice that despite the lighting, we can still see her naughty bits somehow. And then we see a splash page of Pendragon tearing these guys to pieces, and she's wearing a completely different costume. You know, the nudity in Miss Fury was pointless and exploitive, but at least it was consistent. And lest we forget, her entire staff is armed to the teeth with guns. Why is she doing this when it looks like they've got it completely covered? In the midst of all this bloodshed, she points out how she knows these guys already killed some of her other employees. I can smell my doorman's spilled blood soaking the entry carpet, and my hostess, the door guards, and the rest. Way to take the high road there, lady. Show your intolerance for bloodshed by taking these attackers and turning them into splatter paint. She quickly kills the last of the goons, and advises her guests to take their leave. Needless to say, don't linger to attend to the check either. This one's on the house. We then see the cops show up sometime later, while we get some more narration. Rumors are flying that something big and nasty occurred at the Scarlet Club earlier tonight. Wait, rumors? Didn't you just say earlier that you had spies in the club to tell you who was in there and who was doing what? How do you not know what was happening in there? And you've no idea what they were after? Not a clue, Inspector Toomey. It's not as if you could just use your vampiric powers to hypnotize them all into telling you what they're doing here, could you? The inspector has a hard time believing her story about how they were taken down by her staff and some of the other patrons, since, you know, none of these guys have a single bullet wound in them, making me question again why she didn't just leave these guys to be handled by her staff. A handful of guns versus a handful of swords? I'm inclined to think that the guns are going to have the upper hand here. Britt points out how all these goons are identical copies of one person, so much so that they even have the same scar over their left eyes. The explanation of how this is possible is never revealed in this issue, but considering everything else we've seen so far, I'm just going to assume that it's not based in steampunk whatsoever. The inspector leaves, and the woman who was attacked gives her backstory. She came here looking for her sister, who hasn't been receiving her correspondence, and h.g.welles shows up to tell her to stop looking for her. She continues her search, without going to the police for some reason, when she's jumped by the S&M Bane Club here. And this one in the background is freaking huge. Nice move there, artist. Normally, I would never consider coming into an establishment such as this. I'm a respectable woman. Really? And what kind of establishment is Club Scarlet that would make a respectable woman not come into it? It just looks like a restaurant to me. Pendragon and Britt say that they'll keep her protected themselves since the local police are corrupt and unreliable. And this little detail is beautifully illustrated by showing us the mean streets of the city, which are so dangerous that crowds of people can carry out their business in the dead of night without fear. That is a police force that's unreliable. Speaking of, the girl points out how she came into the club because it was lit and crowded, so she figured this would be the best place to look for help. Yeah, no chance of finding any help in this well-lit crowd, I suppose. We then see that radio announcer sign off for the evening, and he goes to the park where he meets h.g.welles. It would appear that the announcer is responsible for trying to have the girl captured, which is a twist that comes from so far out of left field that it might as well have come from a different game entirely. And let's not forget that the guy was able to comment on who is at the club tonight thanks to a network of spies in his employ. If he wants her dead and or captured, why couldn't he just tell them to do it? Next, Green Hornet and Kato. Sure, we do have Green Hornet and Kato right on the cover here, suggesting that they're actually in this story, but they'll be in the next issue, I promise! But yeah, that was Legenderry, a steampunk adventure number 1, and there is nothing legendary about it. There's not really a whole lot of story to speak of here, And for a first issue, that's not entirely a bad thing, since we want to start off a little slow to establish the world it's set in. Except it doesn't really do that either. It's bad enough that you're not going to know who any of these characters are unless you're really familiar with the rest of the Dynamite universe. The art is inconsistent through a lot of the issue, and again, it does nothing with the steampunk aesthetic except just slap it into the comic to make it look visually interesting. And it does look visually interesting, but again, what's the point? If you want a story that actually does something with the steampunk world in which it's set, I'd recommend that you check out JLA, The Age of Wonder. But Legendary?
As I read the Gazette to catch up on the news, some classified adverts I chanced to peruse when I saw a category called Steampunk. I turned to it eagerly but left in a funk, for I quite enjoy the steampunk aesthetic, but what I beheld there was rather pathetic. These intrepid online auctioneers have just taken modern objects and stuck on some gears. It's simply not cricket, it shouldn't be done, but it's clear how their thoughts had run. Just glue some gears on it and call it steampunk. That's the trendy fashion nowadays. A copper-painted chunk of some 1980s junk will fetch a pretty penny on eBay. Steampunk refers to a type of science fiction about alternate pasts, not future prediction, often set in Victorian Britain, but the history of technology has been rewritten. So put a bit of thought into your designs. Use leather and brass, 19th century lines. Retrofuturistic is a good explanation. Blend antique reality with imagination. But calling things steampunk to try to sound cool makes you look like a bloody fool. Just glue some gears on it and call it steampunk. That's the trendy fashion nowadays. A copper-painted chunk of some 1980s junk will fetch a pretty penny on eBay.
Wouldn't it make more sense to just put the goggles around your neck or something?
Subscribe, like, follow, comment, share, watch more.